This course has been designed for anyone working and doing business or in some other professional context, communicating with people from the Middle East. Most notably, the Arab culture. Although we will touch upon the diversity of the region. It will cover areas such as how to communicate, typical cultural challenges for foreigners working in the region, and provide tips and best practice for how to maximize your potential when working with Middle Eastern colleagues, clients, and peers. We'll be exploring topics such as the history, people, culture, and values of the region, and how they impact areas such as business. Through taking the course, you'll develop and raise your awareness of the Middle East as a whole, and think about the potential personal challenges you may face in the region. Above all, it will help you develop fruitful relationships with people, unspoiled by misunderstandings and miscommunication, giving you the insights and confidence to navigate diverse interactions. In this region, public standing and conducting yourself in line with expected local standards are incredibly important. Unfortunately, there are many cases in the professional world which demonstrate a lack of basic cultural understanding, leading to soured relationships, lost deals, and wasted investments. One such high-profile case involved a global security firm operating in the region. At the time of a sacred and highly sensitive religious event, an expatriate senior manager removed posters of revered saints from walls around the firm's complex. These posters are traditionally put up around the time of the event. This led to local riots and employees of the firm assaulting the manager, which led to his evacuation from the country. This is a very extreme example of what can go wrong when you do not understand local rules. However, it also shows that something so seemingly innocent for one party can be extremely offensive to the other. This training will help improve your understanding of the Middle East, ensuring you make the most of your time in the region. We've now reached the end of this section. The next chapter will focus on the importance of cultural awareness. In this chapter, we're going to be exploring the concept of culture, how we see the world, and how generalizations can be both helpful and a hindrance. Culture essentially describes the values, expectations, and behaviors that set a particular group of people apart from others. This might be seen in areas such as language, dress, art, music, and food. Pasta, curry, and paella, sarongs, abayas, and niqabs are all clues as to the culture of an individual. If you see someone wearing an abaya, speaking Arabic, and eating a shawarma, then you know that that individual is likely to be of Middle Eastern cultural heritage. Whereas these examples give easy cultural clues, what about those areas which are not so obvious? For example, differences which we can't see, smell, taste, or touch, such as different approaches to communication. These differences are typically driven by cultural values. They relate to the different ways in which people think and behave. They're learned through sources such as education, family, and religion. It's often these unseen cultural differences that are the main cause of misunderstandings and miscommunication, as opposed to food, drink, or how someone shakes hands. By learning some of these unseen cultural factors in this training, you'll be better prepared to deal with some of the more common challenges experienced by newcomers to the region. The cultural lens is a valuable analogy to help us understand the way in which people of different cultures view and interpret the world. We all interpret the world through our own distinctive cultural lens. Imagine that you are looking at the world through a pair of glasses with a distinctly coloured filter. This filter will colour the way you perceive and interpret situations. Those with different coloured filters will likewise perceive and interpret the same situation in their own way. These lenses shape our reality and expectations of others, which means that very often we see the world as we see ourselves. It's in this way that different cultures view the world. Our cultural lenses differ in respect to what should be considered, what should be ignored, what is right, or what is wrong. For example, in this picture, we see that both women are actually judging each other with the same values. However, what they believe to be right and wrong according to their values completely differ. This is why it's important to understand culture and its more subtle implications. Individuals with little cultural awareness typically assume that the lens they look through is the same one that everyone else looks through. Therefore, they judge others by these standards. When they come across people who do not conform to these standards, then it's likely that they perceive the behaviour of that person as strange, wrong, or abnormal. Be aware, therefore, during your time in the Middle East, to check the assumptions you are making. Are these assumptions driven by your own cultural expectations? Are you judging people or events against a set of standards that do not apply to them? This training will help draw your attention to these potential cultural traps and give you more useful frameworks in which to base your judgments. Now, it's important to stress that individuals in the Middle East don't view the world through a single cultural lens. The lens that they see through and interpret the world can vary depending on the social class and country they're from. With this diversity in mind, although we may in some cases use broad brushstrokes when talking about culture, be aware that we do not wish to stereotype. It's important that you're mindful throughout this training that culture is fluid and ever-changing, and that the cultures in the Middle East are no different in this respect. Although many people will behave and perceive the world within the frameworks we discuss, it will not be the case for everyone. Making generalizations is impossible. However, we're able to work with probabilities based on the behaviours and challenges that many foreigners face. In this chapter, we've explored culture and the way in which cultural differences can play out. We've also discussed the fluidity of culture and the need to be mindful of approaching individuals without preconceived ideas and judgments based on our own cultural values. This brings us to the end of this chapter. In the next chapter, we'll explore the history of the Middle East, the different regions, languages, and religion. In this chapter, we're going to be exploring the history of the Middle East, its different regions, the language, and religion. What we identify today as the Middle East is a region that has evolved greatly over time. The term itself is a modern term, something that was adopted from a Western, namely British, perspective, to describe the area in comparison to the Far East and India during colonial times. The region has, over time, been under the rule of different powers such as the Romans, Byzantines, Persians, Ottomans, Mongols, and various Islamic states such as the Mamluks. The region historically was not split along the lines of countries or nations. Certain ethnicities, tribes, or religious groups did settle in certain areas, such as the Kurds being the main population of western Iran, eastern Turkey, and northern Iraq. The Abadi Muslims of modern-day Oman were originally settled in Basra in Iraq, and only moved to what is today known as Oman due to a religious dispute over leadership. Many of the modern-day royal families in the region trace their heritage to other parts of the area. For example, the Jordanian royal family was originally from the ruling family of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. What we identify today as the Middle East in terms of the different nation-states was the result of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. The colonial powers of Great Britain and France carved what were previously Ottoman lands into various states. These each had new names such as Syria and Iraq. In many cases, royal families took charge of the new countries, although many fell under the protection and administration of colonial powers. After World War II, the region saw the birth of new independent countries, such as Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. In the 50s and 60s, Arab nationalism led to the overthrow of leaders in some countries and the rise of new political parties, such as the Ba'ath Party in Syria, and nationalist strongmen such as President Gamal of Egypt leading the Arab voice. Since the 1960s, the importance of the Middle East has grown, especially since the discovery of oil, leading to decades of political turbulence. It's therefore important in the wider context of history that within the matter of 100 years, the region has seen dramatic changes politically, socially, economically, and culturally. The idea of the Middle East itself is alien to the Middle East. pointing to a much more complex and diverse makeup to the region than one would initially perhaps expect. So, we now understand that the Middle East is very much a modern invention, and as a result, somewhere with great fluidity in terms of change. Now, in the next topic, let's turn our attention to the countries that make up what is today's modern Middle East. In this section, we're going to be looking at the region and its countries. Firstly, it's important to remember that the Middle East has no set borders in terms of where it starts and ends. We define the Middle East as comprising three key areas that share a strong common ethnic, cultural, and historical identity. These areas are the Levant, the Gulf, and Egypt. We'll not be covering Turkey, Iran, Israel, or the countries of North Africa such as Libya and Tunisia, as we consider them to be different enough to warrant their own individual attention. Although all of them share common characteristics in terms of values, religious beliefs, and worldviews, the Turkish, Iranian, and Israeli people are ethnically, linguistically, and culturally separate to the Arab people. Let's first start with the Levant. Today, the Levant consists of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel. The region is considered to be the birthplace of both Judaism and Christianity, which, over time, developed into the cultural and political capital of the Arab world. Due to its religious significance, the region today holds the greatest diversity of religious groups, including Jews, Yazidis, Alawites, and Druze, as well as many Levantine Christian groups such as Greek and Oriental Orthodox. Within the Arab world, this area is considered to produce the best culinary examples of traditional Middle Eastern food. Famous foods such as hummus, baklava, and numerous salads all originate from the Levant. The region also has a great influence over popular youth culture through TV shows, music, and various media outlets. During the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the region's education system was considered highly successful. Many of the Arab world's best accountants, engineers, doctors, and teachers were educated in countries such as Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Our next region is the Gulf, which consists of Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Yemen, and the UAE. Other than the Yemen, all the countries in the Gulf are run by ruling families. Yemen had its own ruling family until the late 1960s, when Arab nationalist feeling led to the downfall of the monarchy and a subsequent civil war, which divided the country into two for years to come. The Gulf countries are economically and politically tied together through the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is otherwise known as the GCC. Until the discovery of oil in the 1960s and 70s, the area held little political and economic interest other than for trade. With the discovery of oil and the subsequent revenues, the region has dramatically changed in a matter of decades, to now home some of the most advanced cities in the world, epitomized by Dubai. Due to their successful economies, the majority of the GCC countries have large numbers of expatriate communities. The smaller percentage come from places such as America, Europe, and Japan. The majority come from Southeast Asia, in particular from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Indians make up a large percentage of professional-level jobs such as accountants, managers, and IT professionals. In fact, in the majority of GCC countries, the expatriate population outstrips that of the locals. You'll often find a hierarchy in these countries between the different expatriate groups. This will define people's level of privilege in that country and how they are both treated and expect to be treated. Relatively speaking, the region is the most convenient for foreigners in terms of transport, ease of communication, standards of living, and entertainment. Although not a region and technically part of North Africa, Egypt has a strong political, cultural, religious, and social influence on the whole Arab world. We've categorized it differently to the other areas due to Egypt's long and ancient history, which spans both Arab identity and the Islamic religion. As a result, Egyptians often see themselves as being slightly different to the rest of the Arab world. Egypt led the Arab nationalist movements of the 1950s and 60s, which was a result of local independence drives against the colonial powers at the time. President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, in particular, is considered to be one of the figureheads of the movement. Since then, Egypt has had less influence over the region and become more internally focused, as a struggle between secular interests and religious groups has come to dominate local politics. Egypt has had a great influence on the Arab world through its literature, popular music, and most notably, its prolific TV and movie productions throughout the 60s and 70s. The singer Kulthum is perhaps considered to be the greatest Arabic singer of the 20th century. Her funeral in 1975 drew 4 million Egyptians onto the streets of Cairo, and she was mourned across the whole Arab region. Visitors to Egypt will find that in comparison to other Arab countries, the people speak Arabic with a thick accent. The cuisine has its own distinctive dishes, and even the architecture displays a country with a different history to the rest of the Arab world. This brings us to the end of our overview of the Middle East. In the next topic, we'll be looking at language. Arabic is without doubt the most widely spoken language across the region. Regardless of religious affiliations, all Arabs consider themselves as one linguistically. Arabic is the language of government, law, and commerce in all Arabic-speaking countries. However, in certain places, such as Lebanon, where French is used, and the UAE, where English is the dominant language, there may be other official languages that are used. When dealing with any sort of official documentation in the region, the likelihood is that you'll need to have them translated into Arabic for local use. Although the Arabic language in written form is exactly the same from Morocco to Yemen, for example, when spoken, there are sometimes vast differences from place to place. How Arabic is spoken in Syria and Lebanon, for example, may be very different to how it's spoken in Egypt or Saudi Arabia. Accents can differ wildly, and local slang can often make the language seem completely different. The region also has many other local languages that are spoken on a daily basis in certain places. Kurdish, Assyrian, and Turkmen are examples of non-Arabic local languages. It's only within the autonomous Kurdish region of Iraq that you would ever find the need to use these languages in any official capacity. English is widely spoken in the Arab world. The language is taught at schools, meaning most people can say at least a few words. Proficiency in English is high, especially in the Gulf countries, where a few generations have now been educated in the universities of the US and Europe. Alongside local languages, the large expat community means other languages such as Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, Tamil, and Tagalog can also be heard in shops and on streets. As with any people in any part of the world, if you make a small effort to learn their language, they appreciate it. So, in the resource section, you'll find some useful videos which will help you get some basic phrases under your belt. This brings us to the end of our look at language. In the next section, we'll be talking about Islam. Islam is without doubt the most practiced religion in the Middle East. Before looking in more detail at Islam and some of its teachings, it's first important to note that other religions are also practiced within the region. Christians and Jews have lived in the region for more than 2,000 years, and the expat population means that there are also Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists. In certain countries, each have their own places of worship. In the Gulf countries especially, you'll find many churches and temples which are used by the Southeast Asian expatriate population. The freedom to practice religion is something that is legally protected in most countries across the region. Now, turning to Islam, Islam originates from what is today known as Mecca in Saudi Arabia, where the Prophet Muhammad received divine revelation from God in the form of the Quran. The Quran and the teachings of Muhammad make up what is known as the religion of Islam. It's crucial to understand the great diversity within the religion and the many interpretations and practices that exist, not only between different Muslim countries, but also within countries themselves. The most well-known difference within Islam is between the Sunni and Shia. Rather than relating to any major differences over beliefs, the split between the Shia and Sunni occurred and continues over the question of who should rightfully have succeeded the Prophet Muhammad after his death. In short, the Shia claim that the caliphate should have passed to Muhammad's cousin Ali, and from there to Ali's descendants. The Sunni, on the other hand, claim that the caliphate should have, and did pass, to the best qualified member of the community, as agreed by general consensus. To this day, the two sects have each followed different leaders in terms of spiritual and political guidance. Beliefs across all forms of Islam tend to be the same in that they all accept there is only one God, referred to as Allah in Arabic, and that Muhammad was the last prophet to be sent to mankind. Muslims also believe in other Abrahamic prophets, including Jesus. The Quran is considered to be the word of God, which has been written and captured in book form. The words of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. Other tenets of faith shared across Islam include the belief in angels, heaven, hell, and that all things in this world are destined to be. Muslims believe that this world is merely a temporary place where people are tested, and those who behave in line with God's commands are rewarded with an eternal afterlife. To some extent, everything in this world can be viewed by a Muslim as a moral test which could affect their afterlife. It's difficult within a short space of time to cover this rich, complex and diverse religion with all its intricacies. We advise people prior to travel to the region to at least familiarise themselves with some of the basics of belief and terminology. At this juncture, it's more important to understand that for Muslims, the sacred is something that is still very much respected. When in the region, areas such as religion, spirituality, and the sacred are not to be undermined or disrespected. This brings us to the end of our chapter exploring some of the key characteristics of the Middle East. We've learnt about the three regions and some of their differences, as well as looking at the modern context and recent politics. The role of Arabic and Islam combine to exercise a great influence over identity and beliefs. In the next chapter, we're going to be looking in more detail at the people, in particular covering topics such as identity, honour, and the role of hospitality in everyday life. In this chapter, we're going to be learning about the people of the Middle East. We'll explore the following 4 areas, which will help us develop an understanding of the influences on people's behaviours and view of the world. As with any people, the Arabs look to the past for their sense of identity. Arab history is tied to tribalism and the nomadic life of the desert. Although in most places the nomadic lifestyle has all but disappeared, the influence of the desert, and especially the importance of tribal identity, are still prominent today. Across the Middle East, old tribal traditions are still visible. Hunting with birds of prey, the herding of goats, camel racing, poetry, dances, and much more are still practiced today as ways of linking back to the nomadic past. The desert life is romanticised and glorified, and the Arabs identify with it on many levels. Tribal names to this day help identify who you are, your ancestry, and your position within the local hierarchy. Tribal connections, alliances, and intermarriages are still vital to developing networks and pooling resources. Don't be surprised if someone in the region shows you where certain tribal lands start and end. To this day, the name of a tribe, its honour, history, land, and wealth still carry a lot of importance. The Arabs' roots in tribalism today translate into many values, customs, and behaviours. The extended family, for example, is still the most common setup, with married couples and kids living with parents and grandparents in large houses. In some neighbourhoods, you may find whole families populating certain streets or a series of villas, as most people tend to live close to their families. Free time, weekends, and leisure is usually mainly spent with the family. As a result, families in the Middle East are very tight, with loyalty to the family outweighing any other. Families are usually run by an elder male who makes decisions for the rest. Their decisions are respected and adhered to as a matter of honour. One of the characteristics of many family-centred cultures is that of favouritism and nepotism. The Middle East is no different in that people prioritise their families first and use a complex system of bartering favours in order to help family members. For example, an uncle with the ability to secure a job for his nephew would see it as a failure if he was not to try and influence or help in securing the job. Similarly, sometimes rules and red tape can be bypassed if you have the right family connections working in the right places. The tendency to favour family essentially comes down to trust. A family member will always be considered more loyal, trustworthy, and compliant than a non-family member. In summary, the Arab culture places great emphasis on the past in terms of its sense of identity. Tribal life in the desert helps explain many of the characteristics of modern-day Middle East, such as the food that is eaten and clothing that is worn. It's also the root of many of the values that people place importance upon, such as ancestry, pride, loyalty, and honour, which is what we'll be learning about next. The concept of personal dignity, honour, and protecting one's reputation is very important in the Middle East. This links back to the tribal history of the people, where face and honour were ways of establishing rules and laws around conduct and behaviour. As a result, one might find the levels of sensitivity over protecting one's dignity much more acute in the region than other parts of the world. It's not only important to understand how to protect others' sense of honour and face, but also your own. Face and honour can be both given and taken. For example, offering praise to someone elevates not only their status, but also your status as the giver of praise. Paying for the food bill at a restaurant is a basic yet daily means of gaining face and enhancing your reputation for generosity. Showing good manners, a diplomatic disposition, and eloquence with the language are the foundations of a good reputation in the region. On the flip side, face is lost or can be taken where one has publicly stepped out of line in terms of behaviour. This might include being blamed for something in front of others, not living up to promises, or doing something above or outside your status or remit. For example, to single out someone in a meeting and identify them as the source of blame would cause shame for that person. Depending on the context and who is involved, the person doing the blaming may actually even lose more face for showing a lack of tact or respect. Should the person receiving the blame be connected to a certain local family of influence, this would further demonstrate a lack of knowledge over local boundaries in terms of do's and don'ts. When dealing with difficult topics or delivering bad news, it's therefore always a good idea to consider whether you should do so in private to avoid loss of face. Another example of where face can be lost is in undermining any form of hierarchy. Taking decisions above, without, or in contradiction to the boss is simply not done. To do so would be considered disrespectful and would lead to a loss of face. Common ways foreigners tend to lose face in the region are in displaying impatience, anger, frustration, and complaining about local conditions. All of them are interpreted in the Middle East as showing a simple lack of manners. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you suspect you may have offended someone or said something you maybe should not have, it's vital to rectify and rebalance the situation as soon as possible. The longer it's left, the less likely it is that any amends can be made. A simple rule to follow is to always plead ignorance and blame yourself for the misunderstanding. Shifting the blame to yourself helps remove it from the other person and allows them a way out of the situation. Another consideration when visiting the region is in how one talks about oneself. In some parts of the world, to make a joke about yourself or to undersell yourself is seen as a sign of modesty. This is not the case in the Middle East, where many will perceive it as a lack of self-worth, which could lead to a loss of face. At the other end of the spectrum, speaking too highly of yourself, your wealth or knowledge, can also be seen as crass. One interesting and sometimes confusing result of the importance given to face is in the aversion locals have to saying no. You may ask someone for directions, and despite this individual not knowing where they're sending you, they will still say yes and point you in the wrong direction. Replying no to a question is seen as almost being rude, unkind, or unhelpful, which would lead to a loss of face. To summarise, dignity, face, and personal honour are very important in the Middle East. Pay close attention to how you carry yourself and how you communicate with people. Always ensure you approach any situation with tact and diplomacy. Courtesy and politeness will carry you a long way, leading to longer-term, more fruitful relationships. In the next topic, we'll be exploring how food, hospitality, and friendship are valued in the Middle East. Hospitality is a central part of life in the Middle East, and it's an underpinning value that everyone in the region shares. Again, the roots of this can be found in the tribal system, whereby treating guests well is traditionally a way of gaining honour. In fact, according to Arab tradition and custom, a person has the right to be a guest for 3 days before the host can ask them to leave. Although this is not the case in day-to-day life, Arabs today still refer to this ancient custom as proof of how much value they place on being a gracious host. As a foreigner, whether attending meetings or invitations outside of work, you'll always find you are met with a sense of ceremony, respect, and grace. This should naturally be returned in the form of thanking them for their hospitality and praising their generosity. People are sociable and like to spend time with one another. Weekends and evenings are usually about being with family and close friends. Food, without doubt, is central to almost all things social, whether it be catching up with a friend or attending a business function. Even when attending meetings, the event will more often than not start with tea, coffee, and possibly some dates or cake. Food is a way of developing trust, nourishing relationships, and gaining honour or face. This is why it's important, if you are invited to partake in food, to go to a restaurant or even attend someone's home, that you accept the invitation. Without having a very good reason not to, you would be viewed negatively and as someone uninterested in developing any sort of relationship, whether personal or professional. Spending time over food with people is where you'll discover most about them, their beliefs, opinions, and where you'll have your most positive experiences in the region. Be prepared for some late nights though. Due to the hot temperatures, most people like to stay up and will eat late into the night. One aspect of Middle Eastern culture that some foreigners find difficult to deal with is the very tactile nature of the people. Personal space is not seen in the same way as in, say, the UK, South Korea, or the USA. They like to get close and personal. A shock for many first-time visitors to the region is to see adult men holding hands when walking in public. Rather than having any sexual connotations, this simply points to the level of closeness and warmth that is expected between friends. Those who keep their distance or who make it clear they do not like bodily contact can be perceived as cold and with suspicion. Family, friendship, and fun are all highly valued in the Middle East. As we'll learn in a later chapter, building relationships is key to success in the region. Developing friendships and relationships based on personal trust ensures you have a local connection. This is very important as it not only gives you access to shortcuts and local insights, but more importantly, someone who will be loyal to you, protect your standing, and be able to come to your aid should you ever need. Being disconnected from the local population, in essence, disconnects you from the complex system of how things really get done. It's very much about who you know, not what you know. So, in summary, the concept of hospitality is central to the Middle Eastern culture. Gaining honour through being a good host, a gracious guest, developing friendships, and eating plenty of good food along the way very much captures some of the priorities for people in the region. In the last topic of this chapter, we'll be considering fatalism, spirituality, and superstition. Most people in the region practice a religion in some form or another. Agnostics and atheists are not very common. In fact, people may struggle with the idea that someone does not believe in anything. To Muslims especially, there is much more depth to this world than meets the eye. An example of this is the idea of the evil eye. You may find people wear special amulets on clothing or that they hang large eyes at the front of their houses. The evil eye is a supernatural force that is believed to be caused by the jealousy of others, which can inflict harm or illness. People use these amulets to keep the evil eye away from things they love and things they believe may cause resentment or jealousy, such as a new car. Another good example of the belief in the supernatural is that of the jinn. In English, they're sometimes referred to as genies, as per the story of Aladdin. The jinn are a people that live on Earth, yet are invisible, as they have been created by fire, as opposed to man, who was created with clay according to Islamic tradition. Occasionally, the jinn enter the human world and are often blamed for things such as bad luck or illness. Pre-medicine, possession by jinn was often considered to explain mental illness. You can still meet people today who continue this belief. It's therefore important to understand that for many people in the Middle East, they look at the world with different eyes. The spiritual dimension of angels, jinn, and unseen forces are all part of this worldly experience that has been predestined by an intelligent creator. As a result, many people in the region are highly fatalistic, believing that what will be, will be. An Arabic phrase you'll hear on a daily basis is inshallah, which literally means if God wills. And it acts as a reminder that nothing in the future is ever known. So, for example, you may invite someone out for coffee, to which they reply, inshallah, rather than a simple yes or no. What they're actually saying is, yes, I would like to come. However, you never know what could happen, so I can't make any promises, as breaking a promise would be bad. This also leaves all parties wiggle room if either decide that they don't want to meet later for coffee. Nobody loses face. Sometimes, however, the use of inshallah can be an indirect way of saying no, i.e., to reply no is going to look rude, so inshallah allows me to neither say yes nor no. It can sometimes be tricky to work out what is being communicated, but most of the time it means a yes, but not 100%. The fatalistic outlook of the people does not necessarily translate into apathy or a lack of willingness to try and take control of life. This could not be further from the truth. People also believe they can change the future through good intentions, the right attitude, and hard work. What's important is to try, but always be conscious that it is ultimately all in God's hands, and that He knows best. It's God they look to for guidance. This is the reason behind a special prayer that Muslims read when they need to make difficult decisions. After reading the prayer, they believe they receive an answer either in the form of feeling, through a dream, or in some other way that helps them make the right decision. In summary, in this chapter, we've learnt about the tribal roots of the region and how this has impacted local culture. We explored the concept of protecting face, dignity and shame, as well as the importance of hospitality and sharing food in relationships. Finally, we dug a bit deeper into the spiritual leaning of the people. This brings us to the end of our chapter. In the next chapter, we'll be looking at some best practices for doing business in the Middle East. In this chapter, we're going to be focusing on communication in the Middle East, and in particular, the role of the spoken word, the indirect communication style, body language, giving feedback, and dealing with difficult conversations. Arab culture, traditions, histories, and heroes are closely tied to their oral tradition. Going back thousands of years, Stories were told and passed from mouth to mouth. Within Islam itself, the oral tradition is of vital importance, for it's the stories and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad that are the basis of much of Sharia law. These were passed down from generation to generation via an oral chain of transmission. It was only later that they were captured in books. Poetry also has a high status within the Arab culture, as the highest expression of their language, with poets to this day receiving accolades for their eloquent use of Arabic. This long tradition of the spoken has had a major impact on the Arab communication style. In essence, what you say and the words you use are seen as part of you, something almost sacred, something that cannot, in theory anyway, be broken. A perfect example of this is the use of silence in the Middle East, when people don't want to commit, offend, or potentially cause themselves future problems by making a promise they can't keep. Sometimes, rather than say anything, silence is all that's needed. When in the region, it's important to pay attention to what you say. Making and breaking promises, no matter how simple, will lead to a loss of face, as your word will be considered weak. In other words, you'll be considered unreliable in all ways. In summary, there's a great emphasis on the spoken word. Honour, face, and public standing are inherently tied to what you say. As a result, the communication style in the Middle East can be very indirect, a topic we're going to be looking at next. In very basic terms, people in the world tend to be either direct or indirect communicators. Direct communicators place less value on the spoken word and do not take relationships, feelings, status, or similar factors into consideration when speaking with people. They tend to say what they mean in the shortest way possible to deliver their message. The value is in being open and clear. Indirect communicators, on the place great value on the spoken word and believe that what you say is connected with face, feelings, and status. As a result, people tend not to say what they think if they believe it could make someone feel bad, cause harm to someone's dignity, or even make themselves lose face. Unlike direct communicators, they use subtle means of communicating their real meanings through their use of words, body language, and other non-verbal means. Within a culture where everyone can read and understand this way of communication, it works. However, where a direct and indirect communicator come together, there can be problems. The direct communicator can tend to see the other as vague, secretive, or even deceitful. The indirect communicator can see the direct communicator as rude, arrogant, and overbearing. Now, in reality, most people fall somewhere in between direct and indirect, with context much of the time playing a large role in how you speak. The Middle East is no different, although you will find that most people do tend to be indirect in their communication style. People in the region place emphasis on manners and non-confrontation. Diplomacy, tact, and grace demonstrate good character. The relationship and protecting face are prioritised, sometimes even above the truth. As with an example in a previous chapter, you may be lost driving in your car and ask a passerby if they know the directions. The chances are that even if the person does not know, they will still say yes and do their best to send you somewhere in the right direction. What's important for them at the time of you asking them is not whether you get to your destination on time and in the simplest route possible. What's important is for them not to disappoint you by saying no, and also to not make themselves look bad by appearing ignorant of local geography. This is why you need to always bear in mind that a yes may not always mean a yes, and no does not always mean no. It's up to you to try and work out what the person is trying to relay to you. If you feel an answer isn't heartfelt or that it's tempered in some way through body language, tone of voice, or use of words, then the chances are that something is not quite right. Again, it will be up to you to try and work out what the person really means and why. You may also find that when people don't want to commit, they'll find it very uncomfortable to give a straight answer. If they don't want to offend you or have not completely understood something or just want to keep their options open, they won't tell you this. Instead, they'll use language such as, "It might be difficult," "I'll have to see," "Leave it with me," or "I'll do my best, inshallah." It's really important to remember that the intentions behind this communication style are positive. It's about relationships and a long-term outlook. One should never interpret this behaviour as underhanded or deceitful. Even worse would be to express this opinion openly. The style of communication does not mean people will not say what they think or feel. People will still say what they think or feel. It is how they say it or don't say it that can be the confusing difference for some foreigners. Silence, for example, is uncomfortable for some cultures to deal with in professional as well as personal circumstances. However, in the Middle East, silence is used effectively for many reasons. Silence can be a negotiating tool to put pressure on someone. It can be used to give people time to think. It can be used to hide ignorance, incomprehension, or shock. And it can also be used to say no. Communication in the region is heavily influenced by status and hierarchy. At this point, it's worth taking a moment to stress an important learning point for this chapter. Although we've emphasised good manners, face, dignity, and a non-confrontational communication style, we should also make it very clear that on occasion you may witness or be on the receiving end of very blunt, harsh, and rude words. People in the Middle East can be very direct, but this is usually dictated by the context and who is involved. Where no relationship exists between people, there is no face to protect. Therefore, if pressed, people will be a lot more relaxed about losing their temper and saying what they mean. This is especially so if the person being spoken to is of a lower status, such as a manager speaking to an employee or a homeowner speaking to the refuse collectors. Although some face would be lost in the process, it wouldn't be considered enough to warrant concern due to the lowly status of the other person and the chances of their peer groups ever meeting or knowing each other. To summarise, we learnt that people in the region tend to be indirect in the way they communicate. This is largely down to factors such as the value of the spoken word and the need to maintain face as well as harmony in relationships. As a result, people may not say what they mean or wrap meanings in subtle words and non-verbal language. Over time and with careful observation, you too will come to understand how to adapt your communication style. In our next topic, we'll be looking at how to deal with conflict. Despite our best efforts, sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations dealing with conflict in one form or another. People in the region on the whole stress harmony in business and in life, but on occasion tempers can be lost. Similarly, visitors to the Middle East who may not be accustomed to some of its ways may let emotions get the better of them. Either way, where a relationship is important, reconciliation is a must. It's important to note that by relationship we also mean any sort of relationship, whether personal, professional, or by association. So for example, although you may lead completely separate lives to your neighbour in your apartment block, if you happen to argue with them even once and leave it without repairing the damage, this will ultimately lead to you losing standing in the block and with people they may know. Within work, it may be the case that something happens between you and someone with whom you have no fondness or personal relationship. Yet, you may have people that you know in common. It risks losing face within a network to leave anything unrepaired. How you repair any damage done really comes down to what has happened. People in the region tend to be soft when it comes to dealing with others. If you approach them with humility, a frank apology backed up with a genuine reason for losing your cool, they'll usually reciprocate. If an apology is not accepted, you've still managed to regain some face through making the first step. Depending on the context, of course, it's really important to take note that you either have to be the person who does the conceding or the person who accepts the apology and then also shares the blame. The sharing of blame is key, as it all helps heal the damage and set the relationship back on a strong foundation. You may find yourself in situations, possibly when you misjudge who you were speaking to, that it's necessary to accept blame, even if you do not feel that it's just. It's essential in order to smooth things over and get things done. In cases where there are two parties unwilling to reconcile, it's the local custom to bring in an intermediary, usually someone both sides know and trust. They act almost like a broker, bringing the sides together and assisting them in a reconciliation. This highlights the importance and value of networks in the Middle East, and the value in having your own network. On the whole, remaining calm, being friendly, showing willingness to communicate, and where possible using humour, will help you get out of most tricky situations in the region. To summarise, remember when conflict happens, it's important to reconcile in order to ensure no lasting damage hits your reputation. Being humble and genuine in seeking to fix things usually goes a long way. And our last topic for this chapter, we're going to be looking at body language and non-verbal communication. Understanding body language is an important part of communication in the Middle East. As we covered previously, it's body language and other forms of non-verbal communication that fill in the information gaps in indirect cultures. People in the region are very tactile. Handshakes can be a lot longer than you're used to. People tend to touch one another, and standing close to each other is common when talking. It's a very touchy-feely culture that values warmth and shared space between people. We talked about men holding hands in the region being a normal behaviour. As a man, if another man from the region were to take your hand, it's a sign of affection. If you don't know them, then they're trying to endear themselves to you. If you do know them, it's a sign of a good relationship. It's important, no matter how unnatural it may feel, to not pull away your hand. This would be interpreted as being cold and ungenerous. It's this closeness that can often tell you how someone is feeling towards you. For example, if someone you're doing business with starts to keep their distance from you, the chances are they're signalling some discomfort with the relationship. Eye contact is important in the Middle East for establishing trust. Avoiding it will be met with suspicion. Always make sure you maintain eye contact, but ensure you break it up every few moments so as not to stare. Staring straight into someone's eyes would be considered invasive. In informal situations, the eyes are used to signal a yes or no. Raising the eyes upwards along with the eyebrows can mean no, whereas exactly the same gesture with a subtle shake of the head can turn it into a yes. By spending time in the region and with the people, these subtle ways of communicating will slowly become apparent to you, and over time you may find yourself doing the same. A final point for consideration is that people in the region are very expressive with their hands and voices. What can appear to be a heated argument with arms waving and fists clenched is usually a high-spirited debate over football or something similarly innocent. Where people become very animated, you shouldn't worry, as this isn't a sign of anger, but of passion, of being engaged in a topic or simply caring. One hand signal that is crucial to learn for the region is when you bring all the tips of your fingers together on your right hand pointing upwards. When people do this and shake their hands up and down, they're either telling you to calm down or be patient. This brings us to the end of our chapter on communication in the Middle East. In this chapter, we explored the roots behind the importance placed on the spoken word and how this is translated into the mainly indirect way of communication in the region. On top of this, we now also know how to deal with potential difficult situations, as well as better appreciate the role of body language. In this chapter, we'll be focusing on some practical tips around etiquette, both working and socialising. First, let's start with what to wear in the Middle East. This will be dictated by the country you're visiting, whether you'll be dealing with the public or private sector, the time of year, and of course, whether you're male or female. All countries in the region share the value placed on modesty. How this is practiced really comes down to all the factors mentioned before. In some places, such as Saudi Arabia, expectations might be a lot higher on a foreigner in terms of what they can wear compared to, say, in Dubai or Kuwait. Generally, the private sector is a little bit more relaxed in terms of expectations. You might find people don't wear ties, and in some IT, media and tech companies, you may find the dress code is a lot less formal, with people coming to work in jeans and sports shoes. As a visiting foreigner, formality is still crucial, at least until you have a clear sense for what is appropriate. If doing business in the region, men are expected to wear suits, shirts, possibly a tie, and smart shoes. The suit jacket is usually removed at the start of a meeting, possibly with the host's permission. Women should wear business attire, preferably with trousers. Showing anything above the knee is a serious no-no, so it's important to make sure that if you take skirts or dresses with you, that they're long enough to be appropriate. Modesty is key for women. In most countries, this translates as loose covering clothing and not showing anything of the body from the ankles to neck and wrists. In some places, however, you'll find the dress code very relaxed, so it's best to take a few different changes of clothes to cover all possibilities. Saudi Arabia, by law, does not require foreign women to wear the hijab, the headscarf, although they are legally bound to wear an abaya, a long black gown that you wear over your normal clothing. Although it might not be a legal requirement to cover the hair, it's wise in some situations to do so to avoid unwanted attention. Or, for example, in rural or traditional areas to avoid causing offence. Business evening wear for men is again usually business attire or, if informal, a short-sleeved shirt, trousers and shoes. For women, evening wear, depending on the location, can often be a lot more relaxed than normal daytime wear. Outside of work, at weekends and during evenings, it's just as important to again dress modestly. You'll notice men almost never wear shorts, unless very young. They're considered too revealing, plus Muslim men have to cover themselves from their knees to navels in order to pray, making shorts a major inconvenience 5 times a day. For men, t-shirts, jeans, sportswear and any kind of footwear you like is fine. For women, again, as long as modesty is preserved, most people are very laid back about what to wear. No matter where you are in the Middle East, you'll soon pick up on the local expectations of what you should wear and be able to adjust. One really important point to bear in mind is the time of year you'll be there. Summers are extremely hot, making anything but cotton uncomfortable to wear. Sunglasses are recommended, especially if you plan to drive. Spring and autumn are mostly fine, dry and warm rather than hot. The more north you travel in the Middle East, the more rain you'll experience over winter. Winters can also get cold, so make sure you take a jacket and a pullover with you, although gloves, scarves and earmuffs won't ever really be necessary, as it rarely gets that cold. Earrings in men are something of a rarity in the region, with many people still considering it a taboo and something reserved for women only. Women will notice that makeup is used heavily in the region, so if concerned about wearing it, you shouldn't be. only take into consideration in some circles, such as with government officials, you'll need to tone it down slightly. How you look in the Middle East is very important. People do make judgments based on first sight, and if you don't appear well groomed and concerned with your appearance, they won't look positively on you. So remember, especially if this is your first time to the region, modesty is key. In the next topic, we'll be learning how to address people and how to use names. Names are very important to the people of the Middle East. The main reason is ancestry. Your name identifies you in terms of your lineage, your tribe, and your family, and therefore your status. Formal Arab names are very easy to understand. This form of name is still commonly used by Gulf Arabs, perhaps due to their closer ties to tribal identity. Let's look at an example and take the name of the current ruler of Kuwait. His name is Sabah al-Ahmed al-Jaber as-Sabah. This means Sabah is his first name, his father's name was Ahmed, his grandfather's name was Jaber, and finally, the name of his tribe is the Al-Sabas. The Al, or sometimes written El, literally means of. So, similar to the English name Johnson, which means the son of John, Al-Ahmed, in this context, means the son of Ahmed. For women, it works slightly differently. The name of the emir's now deceased wife is Fatwa bint Salman as-Sabah. So, her first name was Fatwa, her father's was Salman, and the tribe is the Al-Sabas. You'll note that women take the ancestry from their father's side. It's also worth pointing out that Arab Muslim women, on the whole, don't take their husband's surnames after marriage. Not all Arabs use the same long formal name structure. For example, in the Levant, most people tend to use a shortened version of their name and surname only. For example, the man who most people know as Yasser Arafat actually had the formal name you can see on the slide at the moment. The infamous Saddam Hussein was actually called Saddam Hussein Abd al-Majid al-Tikriti, his name being slightly different in that the last name refers to a place rather than a tribe, the town of Tikrit in Iraq. Another name you may also hear people use is Abu or You might for one moment hear someone referred to as Hassan and then the next as Abu Abdullah. These are known as kunya names and signify parenthood. So Yasser Arafat was also known as Abu Ammar, Ammar being the name of his eldest child. Fatima would simply mean the mother of Fatima. This is popular in the Levant, but you may also come across it elsewhere. When addressing people for the first time as a foreigner, you should address someone with Mr. or Mrs. and their surname. You'll usually be invited to move towards using first names quickly. However, it's always wise to wait for the other side to signal they're happy with this level of formality. As a foreigner, you may find that people call you by your first name with Mr. or Mrs. For example, Mrs. Katie or Mr. Jacob. In some cases, it's fine to also follow suit and call someone Mr. Ali or Mrs. Mariam. On the whole, people are pretty good at establishing what they want to be called and vice versa quickly. You may on occasion need to address people by certain titles. Some professions use their titles with their names, such as doctors. Within the workplace, a chairman, director, or manager may also use their title. Royal family members are usually either addressed with the term sheikh for men or sheikha for women. Emir is a term used for the ruler of the country. If you do meet royal family, it's protocol for you to address them as Your Highness or Your Majesty. Most of the time, someone will inform you before you meet them as to what term you should use. Sheikh can also be used as a term for religious scholars and also for old men as a sign of respect. If someone uses the title imam, this means they hold some sort of religious leadership role, such as being a jurist or someone who recites the Quran. When greeting people, there's little need for anything particular other than the polite greeting for the time of day, followed by some small talk. Many visitors to the region will hear people greeting each other with the words Assalamu alaikum, which literally means peace be with you, and is used between Muslims. If you're not Muslim, you're not expected to use this, although if you do so, nothing bad will happen. Similarly, if someone says the phrase to you, you can use the appropriate response, which is alaikum salam, or simply greet them how you wish. In summary, we've learnt how Arab names are made and what they mean, some of the more common titles people use in the Middle East, and finally, how to address and greet people. In the next topic, we'll be learning more about how to behave in public. When in the Middle East, there are certain do's and don'ts you may need to follow depending on where you are in the region. In this section, we're going to cover some basic tips on how to behave when in public. First, let's start with not showing the soles of your feet. The soles are considered dirty as they're the lowest part of the human body and the part of the body that touches the floor. To sit and have the soles of your feet showing is bad manners, even if you happen to be showing just one sole by crossing your legs. Another part of the body that carries a taboo due to cleanliness is the left hand. The left hand traditionally and to this day is used only for cleaning oneself after using the bathroom. On top of this, within Islamic tradition, the left hand and right hand also carry spiritual symbolism. The right hand representing good, the left representing bad. As a result, you should never pass things with your left hand, such as money, or shake hands with it. Swearing, especially in public, is taken a lot more seriously in the region than perhaps elsewhere in the world. To openly and audibly swear in public would lead to an immediate loss of face and, depending on the context, may lead to you being spoken to by a local or even public official such as the police. Showing public affection is generally frowned upon across the region. Holding hands is fine for couples, but to kiss, hug, and openly display intimacy is a serious no-no that could lead to prison in some countries. Another taboo, also punishable with prison, is to openly criticise the government or royal family. In some countries, especially in the Gulf, any sort of slight on the royal family can lead to serious consequences. It's always best to stay out of local politics, at least until you understand it well enough to navigate the different local loyalties and opinions without harming your reputation. Similarly, any criticism of Islam or preaching of a religion can also have potentially life-changing consequences. Before we bring this topic to a close, let's quickly look at a couple of final points that many foreigners who travel to the region find tough. Smoking in the Middle East is very common. If you're used to smoke-free environments, then you might struggle with some places. Although restaurants and, of course, offices are smoke-free, you often find the interpretation of the law and its implementation to be quite liberal. If you find yourself in a public situation where someone's smoke is bothering you, complaining to them will generally be taken badly. You should always seek the help of a waiter or manager to help you without making a fuss. One aspect of life in the Middle East that bothers visitors to the region is the system of queuing, or to be precise, the lack of it. You may be in line for something, only to find that all of a sudden, everyone behind you suddenly jumps in front of you. If you find yourself in this situation, it's really up to you to patiently wait your turn, or do as the locals do and try to get to the front by any means necessary. Remember though, if someone cuts in front of you, they don't believe they're doing anything wrong, so be careful with what you say and how you say it. So, in this chapter, we've learned some of the more important considerations in terms of public behaviour, such as using your left hand, not showing public affection, and making sure you never criticise the people in power. Next up, we're going to be looking at some tips around gift giving in the region. The giving and receiving of gifts is an important part of professional and personal life in the Middle East. Relating back to the need to maintain relationships and to gain face, gift giving ties people together. Islamic traditions also encourage people to give one another gifts to maintain harmony and good relations. The nature of gifts will vary depending on the occasion and context. The most frequently given gifts are edibles such as pastries, chocolates, sweets and cookies. If you're visiting the region for business, it's always a good idea to take some gifts with you. People really value food items, crafts and arts from different cultures. There are some things you should avoid when giving gifts. For one, remember you cannot give any food product which contains pork or pork byproducts such as gelatin. Any meat and meat ingredients need to be marked as halal. Alcohol, of course, for most people is a no-no. In many places, being illegal or controlled. According to Sharia law, Muslim men cannot wear silk or gold, although this does not apply to women. Gifts should be nicely wrapped. If your gift is not opened in front of you straight away, your host may feel shy to do so. Encourage and invite them to open it and assure them the gift is only a modest gesture. It's important to remember that reciprocation is part of gift giving. It's the norm to also give a gift in return of equal value or symbolism. So, if you receive a gift in the region, make sure you repay it while there, on your return home, or on your next visit. Buying gifts across the sexes, outside of family, is generally considered too intimate and therefore not done. If you're male and wanting to give a gift to a woman, it's always best to say it's from a wife, girlfriend, or mother. This also works the other way round in that women don't normally buy for men and would either say a gift was from their husband or intended for the recipient's wife. This bypasses any awkwardness. Once a relationship develops, it's also a nice touch to buy a small gift for people's kids, as this helps ingratiate yourself with the family through showing affection and consideration for their children. Now, for those of you who may work in companies or organisations with policies that do not allow the giving and receiving of gifts, it's important to try and replace the physical gifts with other gestures of giving. The most well-received and common is to take people out to eat. Try and work within the confines of policy, but still engage in the process of giving. As we covered in an earlier chapter, where you must refuse gifts or in situations where you feel the intention behind the gift is suspect, blaming your company policy or your boss helps deflect and avoid any loss of face by you or the giver of the gift. In summary, gifts are important in building trust and nurturing relationships. Giving gifts that represent your own culture, especially edible ones, are normally enthusiastically received. However, make sure your gift doesn't cross any lines in terms of taboos. Next up, we'll be learning about the etiquette of eating and dining out. If you're invited for a meal or possibly to someone's home for food, you should try to always accept the invitation where possible. The invite is a gesture of wanting to get to know you better. Not accepting without a good reason would be interpreted as having no interest in the person. Whether at an event, restaurant, or in a coffee shop, sharing food and talking is where real progress can be made. Across the region, most places you will go to eat will be familiar in terms of what to do and not to do. It's only in certain regions, in the home or in traditional settings, that local customs around food may be more unfamiliar. People traditionally ate and still eat while sat on the floor. This can be very uncomfortable for foreigners. When sitting on the floor, it's rude to sit with legs stretched, and you should not show the soles of your feet. If you're unable to sit cross-legged, then try to sit with your feet tucked under your bottom or sideways with your feet behind you. Make sure you also don't put your feet on the eating mat that will be placed on the floor. As a guest, you'll be served first and should take the opportunity to say your thanks and compliment the host. In such settings, you'll see locals eating more with their hands, tearing meat and scooping rice. If you feel this is too much for you, ask for cutlery, which is usually available. If you want to use your hands, then wash them, and then make sure you only use your right hand to take food, eat it, and pass it. When your right hand is soiled due to eating food, and you need to pick up a glass to drink, use the left hand to pick up the glass, but prop it underneath with the top of your right hand when drinking. By using the force of your right hand, you overcome the use of the left hand, showing good manners. Be prepared for people using their bare hands and placing food on your plate. They do this to show they're caring for you and giving you the best bits of food to try. Talking with food in your mouth is uncouth, so when the main meal comes, people tend to be quiet and enjoy their food. As such, most talking is done before and after the eating. One important point for going out to eat in the region is over who pays. In the Middle East, people do not accept the concept of going Dutch. To share a bill is not the done thing. People gain face through paying for meals, and as such, you'll find that it is the host who must pay. If you're invited out for a meal, it's good manners to offer a couple of times to pay the bill before graciously accepting and pointing out their kindness. Remember though, this means you also need to reciprocate in the future by taking them out and paying. Your guests will again try to pay, but you must insist the bill is yours. To conclude, remember that time spent eating with people is time well spent. Be a gracious guest, and when you can, a welcoming host, to ensure the relationship develops with mutual trust. In our last topic for the training, we're going to be looking at some common questions and challenges women who visit the region can face. For women travelling to or moving to the Middle East, there's sometimes concern about the treatment you might receive. It's important that people recognise that this concern is often amplified and exaggerated by the mainstream media, who don't necessarily have a deep understanding of the region. Although being a woman can be challenging for certain reasons, for other reasons, many women that spend time in the region also say they feel safe, secure, respected, and very well treated, even more so than they do in their home countries. Outsiders tend to see the different approach to gender as being down to inequality. Although this can be the case, it's not inequality that drives this difference. What does is the very deeply held belief that men and women were created with distinct differences for a reason. It's this difference that defines our roles as men and women. The majority of people therefore see men and women as being equal in status, but not equal in attributes. This is not to say, however, that the patriarchal system does not have its impact. It certainly does, and to the outsider, some aspects of life for women in the region can seem unfair. Foreign businesswomen bring with them a certain status through their professional standing, and as a result, demand a certain respect. However, there are particular things women should be aware of. We covered eye contact and the shaking or non-shaking of hands in an earlier topic, but along similar lines, you may find local men do not look you in the eye or may even not speak to you. Many wives of foreigners also tell stories of being ignored when with their husbands. This can be for a few reasons. Some may consider looking in the eyes as being too invasive of your personal space, whereas others might just be shy. So rather than trying to be rude, they're really just not confident in how to behave. In the case of being ignored when with your husband, then again, rather than trying to be rude, they're trying to show respect to the husband by, firstly, not undermining his assumed status as the head of the family, and secondly, not being too familiar and informal with his wife, which could be taken as inappropriate. Remember, this is the exception, not the rule. A phenomenon many foreign women find uncomfortable is being stared at in public. Where your presence may be something of a novelty, people tend to stare out of fascination rather than trying to make you feel uncomfortable. It's best to smile and just carry on with your business, as there's nothing behind the stares other than curiosity. It's always important to keep your composure. Reacting to things like staring with anger or certain hand signals is not necessary. Being a woman in the Middle East can be tough, but it can also be very easy. It all depends on your perspective. On the whole, you need to show calm decorum and respect for local norms. However, where necessary, you should also not be afraid to assert your rights or opinions. People can tend to interpret constant acceptance as being weak. Being strong-willed is sometimes essential. This brings us to the end of our presentation on the Middle East. In summary, some of our key learning points are that it's important to approach the region with an open mind and to make sure that we don't look at everything through our own cultural lenses. We've learned about the important role that history and religion play in explaining many of the facets of Arabic culture and behaviours. We've placed a lot of stress upon the importance given to relationships, as this is commonly an area many foreigners do not fully appreciate. Lastly, we learnt some of the main taboos and etiquette considerations to ensure that when you are in the region, you're able to understand at least some of the more important rules of conduct. We'd like to thank you for taking our course on the Middle East. We encourage you to enjoy your time in this very welcoming part of the world. For further courses on other topics, please remember to visit our website.